Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another Supercoach Insider podcast. My name is Swizz, here with another team and Supercoach discussion update. We have the Sydney Swans today, very special guest from up north, Lachlan McKirdy from Code Sports and Daily Telegraph. How are you, mate?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, mate. It's a busy time of year. It's great to see footy back in the discussion and, looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, no, I do appreciate it, and you're the lucky one because we don't get to see a lot of the Swannies or even the Giants down here in Victoria. So it's good to actually have somebody who's been out there doing a bit of track watching, and it is a great time of year because you get to obviously see what's happening leading into the season. There's a lot of position changes. There's some new players putting their hand up, and I'm sure you got to see it all the other day at training.
Yeah, no, I think you get a sense from the Swans that obviously they're used to, unfortunately, now these grand final defeats over the last couple of years, but it feels different this time around. It feels like there's a little bit of a bit between their teeth to make things right, and unfortunately for this side, that no one will really be able to judge them until they get back to a grand final and perform there. But I think in terms of that they're doing everything they can to put themselves in that position to get there again.
Probably obviously the biggest change for them off season has been the new coach coming in with Dean Cox. How have you seen that of what you've seen at training with him, I guess, compared to what Horse was doing?
I think first and foremost, there's a real defensive focus that they've been playing a 1v2s for a lot of the match simulations. But even if you're in the twos and if there's a goal that goes against your side, he's demanding players to get back and to make sure that they're stopping the quick release of the ball and the quick counter attack, because that's I think a clear reason where they went, okay, last year when we didn't play well was when we maybe relaxed on defense a bit and let teams get up the ground quickly. So I think that's going to be a big focus this year. But then there's also this idea that they can flick between modes really quickly when they've got the ball in their hands. That you saw points at times during their match simulations where they would really try and kill off the ball to slow things down and really take a slow, methodical approach. But then you'd see them absolutely go at speed and look for those handball releases, look for that quick run through the corridor. So I think they're just trying to become a more well-rounded team and become a team that can hit you from multiple ways, rather than maybe last year where we saw that speed through the midfield with the Heaney, Goulden, Warners, where that was the main weapon. I think they're trying to develop a few different ones this year as well.
And do you think that's the little bit of the Callum Mills influence as well, coming into that midfield, who does have that two-way defensive mind about him?
I think so. I think we'll see Millsy around that sort of those centre bounces and being a really important asset, not just to kind of win that hard ball around stoppage, but to link up the play. That often you'll get Goulden into the game more, or whoever plays the other wing, which is most likely Jake Lloyd to start with, and get them into the open, get them into space. And I think that's going to be a real key, that they find a way to get their stars into the game. And look, Mills might not be the flashy player who kicks 30 goals in midfield like we saw from the other guys last year, but he's going to make sure the others are able to do that still. And I think he's that hard nose that they probably need in there.
And I think that's why Brisbane was such a good team as well, because they had guys like Josh Dunkley doing that, where Neil and your McCluggages can run around and kind of do that attacking offense, which what the Swans were doing. They just needed that little bit of help with, I guess, Rowbottom's kind of their one defensive player, but just to have that extra defensive minded player that can either lock down or just slow the game down when it's required, will put them into good stead.
I think it's just they've got a really well balanced team now. I think this year, you maybe look at them last year and they go, okay, if they lost a couple of key players, you're not quite sure how they fit those pieces back in. But you take a look at the squad this year, I think outside of the defense, where we're still kind of figuring out exactly how they're going to look, I think they've got players who can come in across the board and have a bit of an impact, which is probably exciting to see for Swans fans, because I feel like it's the first time in sort of 4 or 5 years, probably outside of that sort of 16, 17, 18 run, where you go, okay, this is a team that should be challenging deep every single year, because they've got a really good host of young players coming through as well.
Exactly. Like last year, they've been pretty good on the injury front. The only two that I know obviously a couple others probably running around with the injury group, but Logan McDonald, who I've taken out of my sort of best 23 because he is a real wait and see for this sort of round 0, round 1 clash because of that ankle injury. And outside of really Jesse Tatoli, I couldn't really think of too many other people who look unlikely to be there for at least the preseason, especially the round 0 matchup.
Yeah, I think they're definitely the main two. Logan McDonald, it's going to be interesting because he's really only started getting back running to this week. After that ankle surgery, it's taken him a bit longer to progress than the Swans thought it would. So they say he's racing the clock or in doubt for that opening round. I think it'll be hard to see him get up for that opening game against Hawthorn. Jesse Detoli as well. It's a disappointing one, but I think he's had some scans this week that hopefully will really put him back in the frame to start training again. But he had really impressed early last year. I think if you're talking about potential debutants, he was on track to play in that opening round game against Hawthorn. Such was the impact he made. So that's a big blow for the Swans. And I just think that there's a few other guys that are kind of slowly managing their returns. Robbie Fox hasn't done a heap of stuff of the match simulation just because he's managing a few things. A few other young guys, sort of like Will Edwards coming through as well. Brodie Grundy, they're managing as well. Obviously had a big year last year, but at this stage, it's really just those are the main two guys that are probably most in doubt for opening round, or in Jesse Detoli's case, definitely won't play.
Yeah, I was disappointed for Detoli. I know a lot of our Supercoach followers were very big on him and been following his progress. So maybe that's one later in the year we'll get a look at. So I have updated our best 23, which is a lot has come from what you were seeing with that A versus B side at training, which the article you penned the other day for the Daily Telegraph. But so I've got Blakey, Malik and Cunningham, Patton, who I've added into that side, who's been really impressive so far this preseason, coming across from St Kilda, Rampy and Roberts, Goulden, Mills, Lloyd on the wing, Chad Warner, which I'll get you to talk about in a second, but Haywood, Papley, and then Amati McCartin, another big one we need to talk about because definitely has been training forward. And I've slotted Cleary in because I think he's done no wrong this preseason and looks really good. The 182 centimetre forward, Grundy, Heaney, Rowbottom, McInerney, Sheldrick, just on form. I know he's been playing for the B team, but I think he's in that mix of players that are pushing for a spot. There are quite a few of them, Florent, Jordan, and Braden Campbell, who's been doing a little bit of forward work as well. So just trying to add another string to his bow. What do you kind of think of that 23 coming up to at least the preseason games and then into round zero?
Yeah, I think it's kind of where it's looking at the moment. Obviously, Dean Cox may make changes, may have things up his sleeve that he hasn't kind of revealed yet. But Ben Patton's certainly a guy who has come up, taking that opportunity after being delisted by the Saints, and has really impressed. He's playing off that halfback role. He's almost playing a little bit more shut down, but can play that really run and carry role as well. That he was getting on the back of a few handball receives. There was one in the first match simulation the other week where he got on the back of a nice handball chain that he got fed from Isaac Heaney, kicked the goal from outside 50. So it's good to see him impacting the game where we maybe thought Riley Bice was a little bit more primed to take that spot. But it's just interesting. I think the defensive makeup is going to be fascinating because it will be really matchup dependent. Like if you go up against a team like Hawthorn in opening round who don't have the multiple big talls up front, that this is probably a defense that works. You don't have to bring in another tall, but say you go up against maybe a Port Adelaide who's when they have their 3 talls or something like that you might have to bring in, say, a Francis. You might have to bring in young kid Will Edwards, who's working his way back from a little bit of an issue at the moment as well, or even a Joel Hamling who kind of hasn't played a game yet for the Swans since coming over before the start of last season. So I think they've got a few options there, but your main 3 pieces in Nick Blakey, Lewis Melican, and Dane Rampy are your solid 3. Cunningham's obviously one of the best small defenders in the comp on his day. Matty Roberts, I think, really impressed last year and has basically locked down that spot. And then off that halfback, you've kind of got a few different options, whether it is an Ollie Florent who comes back in. He played pretty good throughout the year last year, or you do go a Patton or a Bice. So they've got a few options there.
Yeah, for sure. And you are right with that sort of start of the fixture, like Hawthorn, Brisbane, the first 2 games where they probably don't have the key tools like some of the other clubs. And then probably by then, Logan McDonald's probably right. And when you're getting sort of that Fremantle or Port Adelaide, which come up after that, maybe then even McCartin goes back to support the defence, and then Logan McDonald comes into that forward line.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating to see what will happen with Tom McCartin because he's trained forward all preseason. I think there's been a little bit of question about, okay, is it just a ploy? Is it just trying to give him a few tools if they want to throw him forward? But I know Dean Cox spoke on radio the other day kind of saying, no, we're training him there this season. That's where he's playing. So it'll be interesting to see whether it's a case of, okay, we're waiting for Logan to get back and have that impact. But the way that you see McCartin moving around at training, his teammates are working really hard on him on those patterns, on that positioning. There were a few times in the match simulation where he was probably getting a little bit too high when a teammate was maybe that 70, 80 meters out looking for a kick inside 50. He was coming out on the arc to basically the 50-meter line. And it's just like, okay, Tommy, push back in. You're the key forward. You've got to sit in that box a little bit more, sit in that goal square. So there's a little bit of work going on to make sure that he becomes this complete version of a key forward. And I don't know if he'd be training that much there if the plan is just to throw him back when Logan McDonald is fit. So, yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see what they do. He's clearly come up as a key forward throughout the Geelong Falcons ranks, and that's what the Swans drafted in Maz. But I think there's also an argument that over the last couple of years, he's established himself as the club's number one key defender. So it's kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul at this point. So are they going to just try and outscore teams, or do they back their current defensive structures?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's where I was thinking more horses for courses, depending on the opposition. And it's probably probably the biggest questions and comments you've had, and some of the posts that I've seen with Sydney Swans supporters kind of questioning the McCartin move. But definitely with the footage I've also seen, he is playing forward. So we'll see. I think that'll be at least for the first couple of games, and then we'll review that then. Chad Warner's obviously the big talking point this year. Is probably the biggest name out of contract. Rumours about him buying a place over there in Perth. Seems to be playing a little bit more up forward. I don't know if that's Dean Cox sort of planning for the future there. He's obviously an important part still to a premiership tilt, and it looks like his brother had a few choice words for him on the in the practice match. What are you sort of seeing from Chad?
Yeah, some good early signs from Chad. I think he's just got that electric pace that he can kind of play anywhere on the ground. I mean, in the most recent match sim, he got a ball basically in his own defensive 50 just outside the arc, took about 6 bounces, clear on goal, kicked it from about 40 meters out. So we saw some really typical Chad moments already. And I think we'll just see a little bit more rotation through that midfield half forward line. I think when you look at the centre bounce attendances for the Swans, I think Heaney, Rowbottom, Mills will be your main three this year. It just feels like that's the best midfield mix for them to kind of try and win that contested ball. But then what you can do is when you want to try and be a little bit more damaging out of stoppage, if you want to try and attack the ball or get on the run a bit more, you can maybe move one of them out. You can move Mills back, get Chad Warner in, and that gives you a little bit more run, a little bit more zip. So I think it gives them a few different options and a few different looks out of those centre bounces. And it just means someone like a Brody Grundy can kind of have if I want to bring it to ground and slow things down, we can have Mills, we can have Rowbottom in there to try and bring that contested ball in. If we want to try and score quickly, then we can keep Heaney there, who's breaking out of stoppages and clearances like just as well as he was last year already. You can bring a Chad Warner in, and then you can also bring an Errol Goulden in if you want to try and get a bit more speed as well. So there's a few different options there. And then as you mentioned before, Angus Sheldrick's going to be a fascinating one if he can work his way into the team, because he's playing really good midfield stoppage minutes at the moment for the twos side, if you want to call them that, in these match simulations. And if he can kind of continue proving his worth there and showing his value, then I don't see how Dean Cox can't pick him, because especially the other day on Wednesday, that he was a clear kind of standout because of the way he was not only winning the ball and reading the taps well from Peter Adams was his ruckman that day, but he was finding space and getting out of the stoppage really easily. So I think that's a good sign for him after a year that was so injury affected in 2024.
And I really like the fact that he's playing on the B team. I know a lot of people like these young fellas. If I see them in the A team, it feels more of a lock. But the fact that he's lining up against Heaney, Mills, Rowbottom in those stoppages and actually dominating so well probably puts a bigger tick than if he was just playing up against the B players, and you kind of can't get as much of a read.
Yeah, I think so. And it's been fairly well spread. Like, you've got guys like Ollie Florent who have spent a lot of time in the B team. Taylor Adams is another one, which will be kind of interesting, that he's looked really good in the glimpses that we've seen of him so far this preseason, and looks ready to kind of prove his worth under a new coach in Dean Cox. And I think we kind of forget that even though he didn't play those finals last year, that he still played the majority of the year for the Swans. So if he can work his way back into that lineup, I think it'll be that half forward pressure role, as someone who kind of can rotate through a little bit in the midfield if needed. But I think, there's a real deep desire in a lot of these players who are in the twos. If they can stick it to the guys who are in the ones, so to say, it puts them in really good stead. And that's where guys like, I know you mentioned Corey Warner before, has done that a little bit. Caden Clearing, he kind of would go between the two teams. So whichever one was in the twos was always trying to make a bit more of an impact. So there's a lot of guys and a lot of depth there that the Swans should be really excited for.
Yeah, and it should be pretty bullish if you're a Swan supporter. I feel like if they can get through that sort of first sort of 6 to 8 weeks, Hawthorn and Brisbane, at least they're at home, but they're, tough games on the road, Fremantle, Collingwood in that neutral match over in Adelaide, then Port, Suns, who have been a little bit of a bogey team, even when the Swans have been flying, and then obviously the Sydney Showdown up there. So sort of if that through that first 8 weeks, if the Swans can better than half those games, 5, 6-2. I don't think it's going to be the run that they had with last season, and that there'll probably be a couple more losses in there. But still, if you're the better side of the wins, I think if you can hit halfway and you're entrenched in that 4, it's going to be setting up for another finals tilt. And with so many players, as you said, trying to push for spots. And, I've taken Taylor Adams out of that best 23 where I had him in there earlier. There's so many guys that you can, if form was to drop out of that A side, can come in and play their role. I think the Swans will be thereabouts again come late September.
Yeah, I think so too. You look at I think the first 3 weeks, like you kind of pointed out, is not quite make or break, but you really get a good read on them. The fact that they've got Hawthorn, Brisbane home, and then Fremantle away. It's 3 teams which I think most people will have in their top 8 predictions coming into the season. So if they can go 2-1 and try and at least give them a go, ideally for the Swans 3-0, then you go, okay, the Swans are still the real deal. This is a team still on the rise. If they drop a couple of those, then you start going, okay, then they need to catch up a few throughout the year. So it's a perfect start for them that they know, okay, they can't ease into the year. I mean, we saw their start to this year, last year, that they had that Melbourne game early on, which was a pretty easy win. And they went down to Collingwood and playing Collingwood at the MCG and got a really good win to start and kickstart their campaign. And getting on that run early against some teams who are tougher teams is probably the best way for the Swans to go about it, because it really set them up for a strong year and why they finished minor premiers.
Yeah, for sure. In regards to the preseason game, so we've got the match sim versus GWS at Tramway Oval. Have Sydney or GWS indicated that there's going to be anything different? It's just going to be the standard A team plays first, B team, or we can kind of see a transition at some point. Is it going to be a 6 quarters? Have they indicated anything around how that may look?
Not yet. I know last year it was kind of a little bit of a hybrid fix as you go, but I also know that they're doing a VFL match simulation between the two teams after it as well. So I think it'll be pretty heavily just 2 senior side and maybe a bench of about 8 or so if you want to do it that way and kind of rotate it through similar to those preseason games and those more sanctioned fixtures. So I think it'll be just get as many guys some minutes as possible, manage a few guys knowing that really they've got 21st, 28th, and then suddenly the week after they're playing on the Friday night at the SCG. So it'll be a sense of, okay, let's get some run into these guys, but also not working them too hard because they're a fortnight out from the season.
I was quite intrigued when I did actually have a look at that, where the fact they were playing sort of 3 games in 14, 15 days. Sometimes these preseason match sims are kind of spread out a little bit more, but so you'd expect maybe a little bit of rotation, even maybe in that second preseason game, because it is on the road. They might not take a full squad for that one. But yeah, so I feel like it's more likely you might see more of an A side down at Tramway on the Friday and then, where teams try to get their team right up for that first preseason match or that one preseason game that we have these days, just because the fact they are playing the Hawks on the 7th. I feel like they'll probably go harder there. And then, a few of these guys who are on the cusp will get an opportunity against Gold Coast.
Yeah, and they love sticking it to the Giants as well. There was a bit of feeling even in the preseason game last year, a bit of niggle, a bit of back and forth between the players, a bit of over-celebrating goals that were happening in preseason. So I think there'll be a few players eyeing off that game and going, okay, let's get one on early over the crosstown rival.
Yeah, it's amazing. The moment you get that competitive match, and we've even seen in the match sim with the 2 Warner brothers needing to be separated, you can't take out the competitive instincts of players. And there is always that little bit of, you need to get up, even if you are playing a practice hit up against your crosstown rivals. And even helps like from the admin point of view and coaches, you always want, big crowds early. You want the membership up too. So if people are just reading in articles like yourself when after that match sim happens and who haven't managed to get down there and they see the Swans belt the Giants in a preseason game, you're feeling up and about. You're like, oh God, I need to get those tickets for those first 2 rounds and get, because the Swans are up and about and I want to be part of this journey with them.
Yeah, they had some record crowds last year. They passed, I think it was 500,000 for the first time in their history across the season. So up in Sydney, it's a great time to be a Swans fan. As much as the grand final results will kind of waft over them for a little bit, they'll be fresh in the memory, that you still go, okay, this is a team that's building to something special. It's a pretty exciting young core of the team. The majority of them have signed on, and it's a pretty long-term project they're building under a new coach who's hoping to take them in an exciting direction. So yeah, I think there's a lot to like.
Yeah, beautiful. And before we wrap up, for our super coaches out there, so just recapping, Lachlan's gone. Mills is playing midfield, so lock him into your defence. Ben Patton, if you don't have him on your watch list, add him to your watch list and probably even find a spot in your team. He's really cheap at 133. Looks like Riley Bryce has sort of been replaced by him. I know he was a lot of talk. I know Nets for Life, including yourself, has put together quite a few training notes on his page. From a few people who have been watching the Swans. So that was one definitely to watch. And then Isaac Heaney, again, can't be ignored. We know how dominant he is in that midfield. Matt Roberts looks like he's got that halfback role sewn up and just continuing on from last year. So a lot of interest in some of these Swans players. And yeah, so you should be definitely, if you don't have them in your sides, have them on your high up on your watch list.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I think Padden Bice will be the interesting one. That Bice is still slowly working his way into that kind of experience on an AFL list. And I think that's where Padden, having that AFL experience, probably just has the edge at the moment.
Exactly. Well, Lachlan, thank you for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. The fans will really appreciate that in-depth look at the Sydney Swans, and we'll continue to look at other teams throughout the preseason. We'll continue to look at the Swans very closely, especially as we lead into that first match simulation, which is now only 3 weeks away.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
Thanks, mate. Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.